In the heart of downtown Portland, where the morning rush transforms quiet streets into rivers of caffeine-desperate commuters, stood a small coffee shop that most people barely noticed. The grind and bean wasn't like the glossy corporate chains that dominated every corner. Its weathered brick exterior and hand-painted sign seemed almost invisible against the backdrop of gleaming office buildings and trendy boutiques. But for those who knew where to look, this unassuming cafe held secrets that would soon shake the very foundation of the city's elite. Behind the counter, steam rising from the espresso machine like morning mist, worked a young woman whose steady hands and quiet demeanor made her nearly as invisible as the shop itself. Chen had been pulling shots and crafting lattes at the Grind and Bean for 3 years, and in all that time, she'd become part of the background noise of daily life. For hundreds of customers, they saw her hands, efficient and precise, but they rarely saw her face. They heard her voice, polite and professional, but they never really listened to her words. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What none of these rushing, phone scrolling, deadline-chasing customers knew was that Chen was living a carefully constructed double life. By day, she was the forgettable barista who knew everyone's order by heart, but whose own story remained untold. By night, she was something else entirely, something that would have made those dismissive glances and impatient sighs catch in their throats if they'd known the truth. Maya had grown up in the kind of neighborhood where survival wasn't guaranteed and trust was a luxury few could afford. Her father, a former military sniper who'd returned from overseas with hands that shook from memories he couldn't shake, had taught her the one skill he believed might keep her alive in a world that seemed determined to forget people like them. In the abandoned warehouse district, where broken glass crunched underfoot and the city's forgotten gathered in the shadows, Maya had learned to shoot, not the kind of shooting that made headlines or filled police reports. This was precision shooting, the kind that required absolute stillness of mind and body, where breathing became a meditation and every heartbeat was calculated into the equation. Her father had been a ghost in the military, invisible until the moment he wasn't, and he'd passed that gift to his daughter, along with something more valuable than money or connections, the ability to see what others missed. While her classmates in high school had been worried about prom dates and college applications, Maya had been perfecting her craft in silence. She'd won local competitions under an assumed name, her prize money helping to pay for her father's medical bills and her mother's night school tuition. But she'd never sought the spotlight, never craved the recognition that came with being the best at something most people would never understand. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd ended up working at a coffee shop, a place where precision mattered in entirely different ways. The perfect espresso shot required timing, pressure, and an understanding of variables that most people took for granted. Temperature, grind size, extraction time, these were the new calculations that filled her days, and she approached them with the same methodical perfection she'd once reserved for targets 1,000 yards away. Her regulars at the Grind and Bean included everyone from construction workers grabbing coffee before dawn to high-powered executives who treated her like a caffeine-dispensing machine. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, the hospital janitor who always ordered a cortado and shared stories about her grandchildren. There was Jake, the struggling artist who paid in crumpled bills and always left a sketch on a napkin as a tip. And there was Thomas Sterling, the mayor's chief of staff, who never looked up from his phone long enough to make eye contact, but always ordered the same thing, a double shot of espresso. No sugar, extra hot. Sterling was the kind of man who wore his importance like an expensive suit, and he had the particular talent of making service workers feel invisible without even trying. To him, Maya was just another face behind another counter, interchangeable with any other barista in any other coffee shop. He'd snap his fingers when he was in a hurry, which was always, and he'd drum his manicured nails on the counter when he thought she was taking too long, which was often. What Sterling didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya noticed everything. She noticed the way he constantly checked his watch during certain weeks of the month, which corresponded to the mayor's public appearances. She noticed how his phone calls grew more urgent when he thought no one was listening. She noticed the way his eyes would scan the room, not with the casual awareness of someone enjoying their coffee, but with the calculated vigilance of someone who understood that danger could come from anywhere, at any time. She noticed because noticing had kept her alive in a world that preferred people like her to remain invisible. And on this particular Tuesday morning, as the October sun cast long shadows through the cafe's windows, and the first hints of winter began to creep into the Portland air, Maya's ability to see what others missed would transform her from a dismissed barista into something the city's elite would never be able to ignore again. The morning of October 15th started like any other at the Grind and Bean. Maya arrived at 5:30 a.m., the streets still wrapped in the kind of darkness that made the city feel like it belonged to a different world. She went through her opening routine with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else in her life. Coffee beans ground to the perfect consistency, espresso machine calibrated to the exact temperature, milk steamed to the precise density that would create the perfect microfoam. These rituals had become her meditation, a way to center herself before the chaos of the morning rush began. As the first customers began to trickle in, Maya noticed something different about the atmosphere in the cafe. There was an energy in the air, a barely perceptible tension that made her instincts prickle with awareness. It was the kind of feeling she'd learned to trust, the same sensation that had warned her about trouble in the neighborhood where she'd grown up. Something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on what. Thomas Sterling arrived at his usual time, 7:43 a.m., looking more frazzled than usual. His typically perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and his phone seemed to be buzzing with more calls than normal. Maya watched him from the corner of her eye as she prepared his double espresso, noting the way his jaw clenched when he thought. No one was looking, the way his eyes kept darting toward the windows, as if he expected something to happen. "The usual, Mr. Sterling?" Maya asked, though she'd already started pulling the shot before he'd even reached the counter. "Make it a triple," he said without looking up from his phone. "And add another shot for good measure." Maya raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In 3 years of serving him, Sterling had never deviated from his order. The change wasn't just unusual, it was completely out of character. She prepared the drink exactly as requested, watching as he took a sip and immediately winced at the extra caffeine. "Long night?" she asked, though she didn't expect an answer. Sterling rarely acknowledged her attempts at conversation. For once, he looked up from his phone, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. "Something like that," he said, and Maya caught a glimpse of something she'd never seen in his expression before: fear. The door chimed, and Maya's attention shifted to the newest customer. The woman who entered was clearly someone important, though Maya couldn't immediately place her. She had the kind of polished appearance that screamed money and influenced designer clothes that looked effortless, perfectly styled hair that had probably cost more than Maya made in a week, and the confident stride of someone who was used to being the most important person in any room. Behind her walked a younger woman, maybe 19 or 20, with the same aristocratic features but a more rebellious energy. Her dark hair was streaked with purple, and she wore vintage band t-shirts under an expensive leather jacket. This had to be the mayor's daughter, Emma Sterling, not related to Thomas Sterling, despite the shared last name, but the daughter of Mayor Richard Sterling, the man who'd been running Portland for the past 6 years. Maya had seen Emma's picture in the local papers, usually in connection with some charity event or political photo opportunity. The mayor's only child was known for her academic achievements and her work with various social causes, but she was also known for her attempts to distance herself from her father's political career. She'd been quoted in interviews saying she wanted to make her own way in the world, separate from the sterling name and everything it represented. "I'll have a lavender latte with oat milk," Emma said, her voice carrying the same authority as her father's, but with a warmth that suggested she actually saw the people she was talking to. "And make it extra hot, please. I've got a long day ahead of me." The woman with her, whom Maya now recognized as Catherine Hayes, the mayor's communications director, ordered a simple black coffee and spent the entire time on her phone, fielding what sounded like crisis management calls. "No, we're not commenting on the allegations," Catherine said into her phone, her voice sharp with frustration. "The mayor's statement speaks for itself. We're focused on the infrastructure bill and the education initiative." Maya prepared both drinks with her usual precision, but her mind was racing. The tension in the cafe was becoming more pronounced, and she could feel the weight of something significant hanging in the air. It was like the moment before a storm, when the atmosphere itself seemed to hold its breath. As she handed Emma her latte, their fingers brushed briefly, and Maya felt a jolt of recognition. Not personal recognition, but something deeper, the kind of awareness that came from understanding that this moment was somehow important, that the threads of fate were weaving together in ways that would soon become clear. "Thank you, Emma," sighed, and for a moment her eyes lingered on Maya's face. "You make the best coffee in the city. I've been trying to convince my father to come here, but he's stubbornly loyal to that corporate place near City Hall." "Maybe someday," Maya replied, though something in her gut told her that someday might come sooner than anyone expected. As Emma and Catherine prepared to leave, Maya noticed Thomas Sterling watching them from his corner table. His expression was unreadable, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his coffee cup. Whatever was happening in the corridors of power, it was bigger than the usual political maneuvering that dominated the local news. This was something that had everyone on edge, something that was about to change everything. The afternoon shift at the Grind and Bean was usually Maya's favorite time of day. The morning rush had died down, leaving behind the peaceful atmosphere that allowed her to focus on the craft of coffee making without the constant pressure of impatient customers and ringing phones. But today, the calm felt different, heavier, charged with the kind of energy that made her skin crawl with anticipation. Maya had developed her situational awareness over years of living in neighborhoods where paying attention to your surroundings wasn't just smart, it was survival. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that most people missed, the way shadows fell differently when someone was watching, the particular quality of silence that preceded violence, the almost imperceptible shift in air pressure that came before. Everything went wrong. As she wiped down the counter for the third time in an hour, her eyes kept drifting to the windows. The Grind and Bean sat on the corner of 3rd and Morrison, with large windows that offered a perfect view of the street in 3 directions. It was one of the reasons she'd always felt comfortable working here. She could see everything coming. But today, those same windows felt like vulnerabilities, exposing her to threats she couldn't identify but could definitely feel. The few afternoon customers seemed oblivious to her growing unease. There was Professor Martinez from the local university, grading papers over his usual Americano. Sarah Chen, a freelance graphic designer who wasn't related to Maya despite sharing a last name, was working on her laptop in the corner booth. An elderly man named Harold was reading a newspaper and working his way through a slice of lemon pound cake with the methodical patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. But Maya's attention was drawn to the new customer, who had entered about 20 minutes ago. He was unremarkable in the way that immediately made him remarkable to someone with her training. Average height, average build, wearing the kind of clothes that were designed to help him blend into any crowd. His hair was cut in a style that suggested military background, and he moved with the controlled economy of motion that came from years of tactical training. He'd ordered a black coffee and chosen a table that gave him a clear view of the street, while keeping his back to the wall. Classic positioning for someone who needed to watch for threats while protecting his own flanks. He'd been nursing the same cup for 20 minutes, his eyes constantly scanning the windows and the street beyond. Maya's father had taught her to recognize the signs of someone conducting surveillance. The way they held their body, the pattern of their eye movements, the careful attention to detail that came from knowing that missing something could mean the difference between life and death. This man was definitely conducting surveillance. But the question was, surveillance of what? Or whom? Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Storm coming. Stay alert. Love you. Maya's blood ran cold. Her father had developed his own network of contacts over the years, people from his military days who kept track of things that didn't make it into the official reports. When he sent a message like that, it meant something serious was about to happen. He'd never been wrong about these things, not once in all the years she'd known him. She moved to the back room, ostensibly to get more coffee beans, but really to give herself a moment to think. The prep area had a small window that looked out onto the alley behind the cafe, and Maya used it to scan the area for anything unusual. What she saw made her stomach drop. Parked in the alley was a van that hadn't been there an hour ago. The windows were tinted, and it was positioned in a way that blocked one of the potential escape routes from the building. Maya had grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to notice vehicles that didn't belong, and this van practically screamed trouble. She pulled out her phone and called her father, keeping her voice low. "Dad, I need you to run a plate for me," she said when he answered. "What's going on, Maya?" "I'm not sure yet, but something's wrong. There's a van in the alley behind the café, Oregon plates ... She rattled off the license number she'd memorized. "Give me 2 minutes, her father said, and she could hear the sound of him typing on his computer. "Maya, that van was reported stolen 3 hours ago. You need to get out of there now." "I can't just leave," Maya said, watching through the window as the man at the table checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "There are customers here, and I think someone's about to do something terrible." "Maya, whatever you're thinking, don't. You're not responsible for—" "Dad, I have to go. Someone's coming." She hung up and moved back to the front of the cafe, her mind racing through possibilities. The surveillance, the stolen van, the general atmosphere of tension that had been building all day, it all pointed to something big happening, and happening soon. Maya found herself automatically calculating angles and distances, her training taking over even as her conscious mind struggled to process what was happening. Man at the table stood up, leaving his barely touched coffee behind. He walked to the window and looked out at the street, then pulled out his phone and made a brief call. Maya couldn't hear what he said, but she could see his lips moving, and she was pretty sure she caught the word green and something that looked like light. Whatever was about to happen, it was happening now. Maya's training kicked in with crystalline clarity as she watched the man at the table end his phone call. Everything around her seemed to slow down, the way it had during those countless hours of practice with her father, when he'd taught her that the difference between life and death often came down to fractions of seconds and the ability to act. While others hesitated, she moved to the espresso machine, using the activity as cover while she continued to observe. The man was now standing by the window, his posture suggesting he was waiting for something specific. Maya's enhanced awareness, honed by years of situational training, picked up details that would have been invisible to most people. The way he kept checking his watch, the slight bulge under his jacket that suggested he was carrying something heavy, the fact that he kept glancing toward the corner of 3rd and Morrison, as if expecting someone to appear. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the street, and Maya realized with growing horror that the positioning was perfect for what her father would have called a textbook urban ambush. The cafe's location provided multiple sightlines. The afternoon traffic would mask the sound of vehicles moving into position, and the mixed commercial and residential area meant there would be plenty of innocent people around to create confusion. And cover, her phone buzzed with another text from her father. Local police scanners going crazy. Multiple units being repositioned. Something big happening downtown. Get out now. Maya's hands moved automatically, continuing to clean the espresso machine while her mind raced through tactical assessments. If this was what she thought it was, then leaving would mean abandoning Professor Martinez, Sarah Chen, and Harold to whatever was about to happen. But staying meant putting herself in the middle of a situation that could very well get her killed. The decision was made for her when she saw the black sedan turn onto Morrison Street. It was moving slowly, deliberately, the kind of careful navigation that suggested the driver was looking for something specific. Maya's enhanced vision, trained through years of precision shooting, caught details that would have been meaningless to most observers. The way the car's windows were slightly tinted, the careful positioning that kept it in the blind spot of most security cameras, the fact that it was maintaining the exact speed limit, nothing that would draw attention from casual observers. Through the cafe's windows, Maya could see that the sedan was heading directly toward the intersection where the grind and bean sat. Her stomach dropped as she realized what was about to happen. This wasn't just a robbery or a random act of violence. This was a coordinated operation, and the target was about to walk directly into the kill zone. The man at the table received another phone call, this one shorter than the first. Maya watched his lips move and was almost certain she saw him say, "Target acquired." That's when she saw her. Emma Sterling, the mayor's daughter, was walking down 3rd Street toward the cafe. She was alone this time, no security detail, no communications director hovering nearby. Just a young woman in jeans and a college sweatshirt. Probably coming back for another one of those lavender lattes she'd enjoyed that morning. Maya's tactical mind immediately began calculating the setup. The man in the cafe was the spotter, positioned to confirm the target's arrival and provide real-time intelligence. The van in the alley was the extraction vehicle, ready to remove the assault team once the job was done. The stolen sedan was the primary attack vehicle, probably containing the shooters who would execute the actual hit. Emma was walking directly into a perfectly orchestrated ambush, and she had no idea what was waiting for her. Maya could see the young woman checking her phone, probably texting friends or scrolling through social media, completely unaware that multiple teams of professionals were positioning themselves to end her life. The man at the table was now speaking into what Maya realized was a throat microphone, the kind used by military and law enforcement teams for covert communications. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested he was providing a countdown or status update. Maya's training had taught her to recognize the signs of imminent action. The way the man's posture shifted slightly, preparing for movement. The way his eyes swept the street one final time, checking for potential complications. The way he positioned himself near the cafe's door, ready to either flee or engage depending on how events unfolded. She had maybe 30 seconds before Emma reached the intersection. 30 seconds to decide whether to run, hide, or do something that would forever change the trajectory of her carefully invisible life. Maya thought about her father's words. Sometimes the hardest shot isn't the one you take, it's the one you don't take. But when the time comes, when someone innocent is about to die, and you're the only one who can stop it, that's when you find out who you really are. The black sedan was now idling at the corner, its engine running. Maya could see at least 2 figures inside, their faces obscured by the tinted windows. Emma was 15 steps away from the cafe entrance, still completely unaware of the danger that was about to engulf her. Maya made her choice. She grabbed her phone and sent a text to her father, going loud. "Call 911. Target is the mayor's daughter. multiple shooters. I'm going to try to stop this. Then she did something that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew her as just another barista at just another coffee shop. She accessed a part of herself that she'd kept hidden for 3 years, the part that had been trained to kill at distances that most people couldn't even imagine. The hunt was about to begin. Maya's world contracted to the size of a pinpoint as every lesson her father had ever taught her crystallized into this single moment. Time didn't slow down, it became irrelevant. Distance became mathematical. Wind patterns became calculable variables. The chaotic noise of urban life faded into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. Emma Sterling was 10 steps from the cafe entrance when Maya saw the sedan's rear window begin to roll down. The motion was slow, deliberate, professional. Maya's enhanced vision caught the brief flash of metal as the barrel of a rifle appeared in the gap. Not a handgun, not something meant for close-quarters work, but a precision weapon designed for exactly this kind of urban assassination. The man at the table was speaking rapidly into his throat microphone, his voice barely audible but his urgency unmistakable. Maya caught fragments. Target confirmed. Green light. She had perhaps 3 seconds before Emma walked directly into the kill zone. 3 seconds to cover the distance between the espresso machine and the window. 3 seconds to acquire a target moving at approximately 30 miles per hour through city traffic. 3 seconds to make a shot that would either save an innocent life or end her own. Maya's body moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours training for a moment exactly like this. She grabbed the first projectile. She could find a ceramic coffee mug, heavy and solid, from the counter beside the espresso machine. Her father had taught her that in urban combat, you used whatever was available, and you used it with absolute commitment. The physics calculations ran through her mind automatically. Distance to target, approximately 45 feet. Target velocity, roughly 22 miles per hour. Wind factor, minimal, blocked by surrounding buildings. Projectile weight, approximately 12 ounces. Trajectory, parabolic, accounting for gravity and air resistance. Maya's right arm snapped back and forward with the kind of explosive motion that came from years of training her entire body to work as a single, coordinated weapon system. The coffee mug flew through the air in a perfect arc, its trajectory calculated not to hit the gunman directly, but to strike the barrel of his rifle at the exact moment he was acquiring his target. The ceramic mug shattered against the rifle barrel with a sound like a gunshot, sending fragments flying and knocking the weapon off target. The bullet that had been meant for Emma Sterling's head instead shattered the window of a parked car 20 feet away from where she was walking. Emma spun around at the sound of breaking glass, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. She was still standing in the middle of the sidewalk, still exposed, still in mortal danger. The sedan was already moving, its occupants repositioning for a second shot. Maya was already in motion, vaulting over the counter with the kind of fluid athleticism that came from years of physical conditioning. She hit the cafe floor running, her destination the front door and the young woman who was standing frozen in the middle of what had become a kill zone. "Emma, get down!" Maya shouted, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from someone who had trained to take command in crisis situations. "Move! Now!" The young woman's survival instincts kicked in, and she dove behind a parked car just as the sedan's passenger side window rolled down and a second rifle appeared. Maya saw the muzzle flash before she heard the shot, and the bullet splintered. The concrete where Emma had been standing just a second before. Maya reached the sidewalk and kept running. Her destination now the black sedan that was trying to maneuver for another shot. The driver was having trouble positioning the vehicle in the afternoon traffic, and Maya could see the frustration in the gunman's body language as he struggled to reacquire his target. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the weapon she'd carried every day for the past 3 years. The one thing that connected her to the person she'd been before she'd become invisible behind the counter of the grind and bean. It was a tactical knife, military grade, the kind of weapon that could end a life in seconds if used by someone who knew what they were doing. Maya knew exactly what she was doing. She reached the sedan just as the gunman was leaning out the window for another shot. Maya's blade found the gap between the man's body armor and his helmet, a precision strike that ended the threat instantly. The rifle clattered to the pavement as the gunman slumped forward. The driver of the sedan gunned the engine, trying to escape, but Maya was already moving again. She grabbed the fallen rifle and put 2 shots through the sedan's rear tires, sending the vehicle into a skidding halt against a fire hydrant. The impact was enough to trigger the airbags, temporarily stunning the remaining occupants. Police sirens were already getting closer, and Maya could hear the sound of multiple units converging on the scene. Her father's contacts had evidently gotten through to the right people, and the cavalry was on its way. Maya ran back to where Emma was still crouched behind the parked car, her face pale with shock but her eyes bright with the kind of clarity that came from surviving something that should have killed her. "Are you hurt?" Maya asked, her voice gentle now, the tactical intensity replaced by genuine concern. Emma shook her head, then looked up at Maya with an expression of amazement and gratitude. You saved my life. Who are you?" Maya smiled, the kind of smile that carried the weight of secrets finally revealed. "I'm Maya Chen. I make coffee." The sound of police cars filled the air, and Maya knew that her invisible life was about to become very visible indeed. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of flashing lights, police interrogations, and the kind of organized chaos that followed attempted assassinations in downtown Portland. Maya found herself at the center of a storm she'd spent 3 years trying to avoid, surrounded by federal agents, local detectives, and officials whose names she recognized from the evening news. The scene outside, the grind and bean, had been transformed into something resembling a military operation. Police tape cordoned off a 3-block radius. Crime scene investigators were photographing every inch of pavement where the action had taken place, and emergency medical teams were treating the surviving members of the assassination team. The man Maya had neutralized with her knife hadn't survived the encounter, but the driver and the spotter from inside the café were alive and in custody. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the Portland Police Bureau, sat across from Maya in an interview room at the downtown precinct. Maya had been through enough police interactions in her younger years to know that this wasn't a standard witness interview. The way Martinez kept checking her notes, the presence of federal agents just outside the door, and the particular intensity of the questions all suggested that Maya had stepped into something much bigger than a simple assassination attempt. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Detective Martinez said, reviewing her notes for the 3rd time. "You're telling me that you identified a coordinated assassination team, calculated a precision throw to disrupt their first shot, and then engaged multiple armed suspects with a knife and a rifle you'd never touched before?" Maya had been careful with her answers, sticking to the facts while avoiding any details that might reveal the full extent of her training. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood. You learn to notice things that don't belong. When I saw armed men positioning themselves around a young woman, I did what anyone would do. Miss Chen, what anyone would do is call the police and take cover. What you did was execute a tactical response that would have impressed a Navy SEAL team leader. Where exactly did you learn to throw a coffee mug with that kind of precision?" Before Maya could answer, the interview room door opened and Thomas Sterling walked in, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past 2 hours. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie loose, and there was a haunted quality in his eyes that Maya had never seen before. "Detective Martinez, I need to speak with Miss Chen," Sterling said, his voice carrying the kind of authority That came from years of navigating political crisis situations. "Sir, this is an active investigation. Miss Chen is a key witness, and we're still—" "Detective, I'm not asking." Sterling's tone left no room for argument. "Miss Chen saved the life of the mayor's daughter. The mayor himself has asked me to express his personal gratitude, and there are some things that need to be discussed privately." Martinez looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Sterling's expression convinced her to leave the room. Maya found herself alone with the man who had dismissed her existence for 3 years, and the irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Sterling sat down in the chair Martinez had vacated, and for the first time since Maya had known him, he looked directly at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years you've been making my coffee, and I never once bothered to learn your name. I treated you like you were invisible. Most people do, Maya replied, keeping her voice neutral. It's easier that way. Easier for whom? Maya considered. The question, for everyone. People don't have to feel guilty about how they treat service workers if they don't think of them as real people. And people like me get to go about our lives without unwanted attention. Sterling was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. The things you did today... That wasn't the response of a barista who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was the response of someone with serious training, military training. I've never been in the military. But your father was. Marcus Chen, Army Ranger, decorated sniper, served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Sterling had clearly done his homework in the past 2 hours. Medical discharge for PTSD, now works as a private security consultant. And apparently, he taught his daughter a few things along the way. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Her father's background wasn't exactly classified information, but it wasn't something she advertised either. The fact that Sterling had managed to dig it up so quickly suggested that someone with serious resources was looking into her life. Miss Chen, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you've earned that level of honesty. The attempt on Emma's life wasn't random. It was part of something bigger, something that threatens not just the mayor's family, but the stability of the entire city government. We think there's going to be more attempts, and we think they're going to escalate. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Sterling leaned forward, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. Because you've just proven that you're the kind of person who can stop them. And right now, you might be the only person in this city who can. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The safe house was located in an upscale neighborhood that Maya had only seen from the outside. The kind of place where security systems were invisible but omnipresent, and where the silence was bought and paid for by people who valued their privacy above all else. Mayor Richard Sterling had insisted on the meeting, despite the protests of his security team, and Maya found herself sitting in a living room that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. Emma. Sterling was curled up in a leather chair. That looked like it had been imported from Italy, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The events of the afternoon had shaken her more than she was willing to admit, and Maya could see the delayed shock beginning to set in. It was a normal response to surviving something that should have killed her, but Maya knew from experience that the real impact wouldn't hit until later, when the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what had almost happened finally sank in. Mayor Sterling looked older than his 55 years as he paced back and forth in front of the fireplace, his phone constantly buzzing with calls from advisors, security officials, and media managers trying to control the narrative of what had happened. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. But tonight he looked like someone carrying the weight of decisions that might determine whether his family lived or died. The people who tried to kill my daughter weren't random criminals, the mayor said. stopping his pacing to look directly at Maya. They were professionals, well-funded, and they had access to intelligence that should have been limited to a very small circle of people. Someone with access to Emma's schedule, her movements, her security protocols, set this up. Maya had suspected as much. The coordination of the attack, the positioning of the vehicles, the timing of Emma's arrival, it all pointed to someone on the inside, providing information to the assassination team. How many people knew Emma would be at the cafe today? Maya asked. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out, Thomas Sterling said, entering the room with a tablet full of data and a kind of grim expression that suggested the answers weren't encouraging. Emma's schedule is managed by a team of 4 people. Her security detail consists of 6 rotating officers. The mayor's communications team has access to family schedules for coordination purposes. That's at least 15 people who could have known she would be at the Grind and Bean this afternoon. Emma spoke for the first time since they'd arrived at the safe house, her voice quiet but steady. I didn't tell anyone I was going back to the cafe. It was a spontaneous decision. I was walking back from campus and decided I wanted another one of those lattes. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. If Emma's visit to the cafe had been spontaneous, then either the assassination team had been incredibly lucky or someone had been tracking her movements in real time. Your phone, Maya said suddenly. Do you have any tracking apps, location services, anything that might broadcast your position? Of course, Emma said, pulling out her smartphone. Find my friend's Instagram location tags, Google Maps. The usual stuff everyone has. Thomas Sterling was already reaching for the phone. We need to assume that your device has been compromised. Someone could have been monitoring your location data, waiting for you to present a vulnerable target. Mayor Sterling stopped pacing and turned to face Maya directly. Miss Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The way you handled yourself today, the precision of your actions, the tactical awareness. You demonstrated that level of skill doesn't come from casual training. Who are you really? Maya had known this question was coming, but she still wasn't sure how much of the truth she was ready to reveal. Her father had taught her that information was a weapon, and like any weapon, it could be used against you if it fell into the wrong hands. My father taught me to protect myself and the people around me, she said carefully. He believed that in a world where violence was always a possibility, the ability to respond with controlled force was a responsibility, not just a skill. That's not an answer, the mayor said. That's a deflection. Miss Chen, someone just tried to murder my daughter, and the only reason she's alive is because you happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right skills. I need to know if that was actually a coincidence or if there's something else going on here. Maya felt the weight of their stares, the pressure of secrets that she'd carried for years. But she also felt something else, a sense of responsibility that went beyond her desire to remain invisible. These people needed to understand what they were dealing with, and that meant revealing parts of herself that she'd kept hidden. My father was more than just a sniper, she said finally. After he left the military, he worked with various government agencies, providing specialized training for situations that required unconventional solutions. He taught me everything he knew because he believed that someday I might need those skills to survive. What kind of agencies? Thomas Sterling asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. The kind that don't officially exist, Maya replied. The kind that handle problems that can't be solved through normal channels. Emma looked up from her tea, her eyes wide with realization. You're like a secret agent or something. Maya almost smiled. I'm a barista who knows how to shoot. But my father was the kind of person governments called when they needed someone to disappear, or when they needed a problem to go away permanently. He retired from that life when I was born, but he never stopped preparing for the possibility that his past might catch up with him. The mayor sat down heavily in the chair across from Maya. "Are you suggesting that this attack on my daughter might be connected to your father's work?" "I don't know," Maya said honestly. "But I know that professional assassination teams don't just materialize out of nowhere. Someone with serious resources and serious connections put this together. The question is whether they were targeting Emma specifically, or whether they were trying to send a message to you." "What kind of message?" Maya's expression darkened as she considered the possibilities. "The kind that says they can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime they want. The kind that says no one is safe, no matter how much security they have or how careful they are. It's a demonstration of power, designed to make you afraid and compliant." Thomas Sterling was typing rapidly on his tablet, cross-referencing data, and looking more worried with each passing minute. "Miss Chen, we've been analyzing the tactical approach used in today's attack, and it matches the signature of a very specific type of operation. Military precision, multi-team coordination, real-time intelligence. This is the kind of thing that would normally be carried out by special operations forces or high-level mercenary organizations, which means that whoever is behind this has access to the kind of resources that most criminal organizations can only dream of. We're not dealing with local thugs or even organized crime families. We're dealing with someone who can hire the same caliber of operators that governments use for Black Ops missions." Maya felt a chill of recognition. Her father had described operations like this, missions where the goal wasn't just to eliminate a target, but to send a message that would reshape the political landscape. If someone was targeting the mayor's family with this level of sophistication, it meant they were playing for stakes much higher than local politics. "Mayor Sterling," Maya said, her voice carrying the kind of gravity that made everyone in the room pay attention. "I think your daughter was just the opening move in something much bigger. And if I'm right, then what happened today was just the beginning." Asterisk. The basement of Maya's father's house looked like a cross between a military command center and a historian's archive. Maps of Portland covered every wall, marked with red pins that indicated locations of interest, green pins that showed safe houses and escape routes, and black pins that marked places where Marcus Chen had identified potential threats. Computer monitors displayed news feeds, police scanner transcripts, and data streams that most civilians would never have access to. This was the nerve center of a man who had spent decades learning to see patterns that others missed. Marcus Chen was exactly what Maya had expected her father to become after years of military service and private security work. His hair had gone completely gray, and his hands showed the fine tremor that came from stress and too many sleepless nights. But his eyes were still sharp with the kind of intelligence that had made him one of the most effective snipers of his generation. When Maya had called him at midnight and asked him to host a meeting with the mayor's family, he hadn't asked questions. He'd simply said, "Bring them over." "The people who tried to kill your daughter," Marcus said, pointing to a map of downtown Portland that was covered with tactical markings, didn't just wake up one morning and decide to become assassins. This kind of operation requires months of planning, significant financial backing, and access to intelligence networks that most criminal organizations can't penetrate. Mayor Sterling leaned forward, studying the map with the intensity of someone whose family's survival might depend on understanding every detail. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we're dealing with a conspiracy that goes far beyond local politics," Marcus replied. The team that attacked Emma consisted of at least 6 people, 2 shooters, a spotter, a driver, a surveillance coordinator, and probably a mission commander who was directing the operation from a remote location. That level of coordination requires professional military or intelligence training. Thomas Sterling, who had been quiet since they'd arrived, finally spoke up. "We've been analyzing the financial records of known criminal organizations in the Pacific Northwest, looking for any unusual expenditures that might indicate the hiring of outside contractors. What we found is disturbing. He pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through documents that Maya could see were marked with various levels of security classifications. Over the past 6 months, there have been at least 12 transfers of significant amounts of money. We're talking millions of dollars from offshore accounts to various shell companies operating in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Emma, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, looked up from her phone where she'd been researching the various people and organizations her father dealt with as mayor. "Dad, what if this isn't just about you? What if whoever is behind this is targeting multiple officials?" Marcus walked over to another wall where he'd pinned up newspaper clippings, police reports, and what looked like surveillance photos. "Your daughter might be onto something, Mayor. Over the past year, there have been 7 incidents involving public officials or their families in the Pacific Northwest. A city councilman in Seattle was killed in what police called a random carjacking. A judge in Spokane died in a car accident that investigators later determined had been staged. A state representative in Eugene survived an assassination attempt that was blamed on a mentally unstable constituent." "You think they're all connected?" Maya asked, though she was already beginning to see the pattern that her father was laying out. "I think someone is systematically removing or intimidating public officials who pose a threat to their interests," Marcus replied. "The question is, what interests are we talking about?" Mayor Sterling pulled out his own phone and began scrolling through his contacts. "There's someone I need to call. Patricia Nakamura. She's a federal investigator who specializes in organized crime and public corruption. If there's a pattern here, she'd be able to see it." While the mayor made his call, Maya found herself studying the wall of information her father had assembled. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer with each piece of evidence, and what she saw made her stomach clench with worry. This wasn't just about one assassination attempt or even one city's political structure. Someone was waging a systematic campaign against the entire framework of local government in the Pacific Northwest. "Dad," Maya said quietly, "if you're right about this, then today's attack on Emma was just the beginning. Whoever is behind this is going to escalate." Marcus nodded grimly. "Which means we need to identify their next target before they do." "Thomas." Sterling looked up from his tablet, his face pale with realization. "I think I know who their next target is." "Who?" "Your father mentioned 7 incidents involving public officials. But there's an 8th case that hasn't been made public yet because it's still under investigation. 3 days ago, Governor Patricia Henley received a credible death threat that included specific details about her family's movements and security protocols. The FBI is treating it as a legitimate threat, but they haven't been able to identify the source." Maya felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. They're working their way up the chain of command. Local officials first, then state officials, then federal officials, Marcus finished. "This isn't just about controlling local politics. Someone is trying to destabilize the entire governmental structure of the region." Emma stood up suddenly, her phone still in her hand. "Dad, I think we need to see this. I've been researching the shell companies that Thomas mentioned, and I found something. One of them is registered to an address that's only 2 blocks away. From the grind and bean, they've been watching us for months." The room fell silent as the implications of Emma's discovery sank in. Maya realized that her invisible life was about to become very visible indeed, and the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. Dawn was breaking over Portland when Maya's phone rang with the kind of urgency that made her instantly alert. She'd been dozing fitfully in the chair beside Emma's bed at the safe house, her body exhausted, but her mind refusing to shut down completely. 3 years of hiding had taught her to sleep lightly, but the events of the past 24 hours had pushed her hypervigilance into overdrive. "Maya, we have a problem," Her father's voice was tight with stress. "The shell company Emma identified. It's not just a surveillance operation. We've been monitoring their communications, and they're planning something for this morning." Maya was already moving, checking the window for any signs of unusual activity, while keeping her voice low enough not to wake Emma. "What kind of something?" "They know where you are. They know about the safe house. They know about our meeting last night, and they know that you're the one who stopped their operation yesterday. Maya, they're coming for you specifically." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. By saving Emma's life, she'd painted a target on her own back that was visible to everyone involved in the conspiracy. Her invisible life was not just over, it had become a liability that threatened everyone around her. "How long do we have?" "Based on their communication patterns, maybe an hour. 2 at the outside." "Maya, these aren't the same people who attacked Emma yesterday. These are cleanup specialists, the kind of operators who are brought in to eliminate problems that threaten the entire operation." Maya looked over at Emma, still sleeping peacefully despite everything that had happened. The young woman had shown remarkable resilience, but she was still a civilian who had been thrust into a world where survival depended on skills she'd never had to develop. Protecting her while evading a team of professional killers was going to require every tactical advantage Maya could create. "Dad, I need you to contact Mayor Sterling and Thomas. Tell them to implement whatever emergency security protocols they have. If these people are willing to target a safe house that was supposed to be secret, then nowhere is actually safe." "Already done. The mayor's family is being moved to a federal facility, and Thomas is coordinating with FBI and Secret Service personnel." "But Maya, you need to understand something. The people coming for you aren't going to stop with just eliminating you as a threat. Your intervention yesterday exposed their operation and cost them millions of dollars in planning and resources. They're going to make an example of you." Maya felt the familiar calm that came with accepting a dangerous mission. Her father had taught her that fear was just another variable to calculate, and panic was a luxury that professionals couldn't afford. She had 1 hour to turn the tables on people who were experts at making problems disappear. "Dad, I need everything you have on urban evasion tactics, and I need you to create a diversion that will draw their attention away from Emma while I deal with the immediate threat." "Maya, you're talking about engaging multiple operators who have every advantage: numbers, equipment, intelligence, and home field advantage. Even with your training, the odds are not in your favor." "The odds weren't in my favor yesterday either. But Emma Sterling is alive, because sometimes you have to take the shot even when the mathematics don't add up perfectly." Maya began moving through the safe house, gathering supplies and assessing escape routes with the methodical precision her father had drilled into her. The building had been chosen for its defensive capabilities, but Maya was thinking in terms of mobility rather than fortification. Against a numerically superior force with professional training, her best advantage was her ability to control the terms of engagement. She woke Emma gently, explaining the situation in terms that conveyed the urgency without causing panic. "We need to move. The people who tried to kill you yesterday have found us, and this time they're coming with more resources." Emma was awake instantly, her survival instincts sharpened by the previous day's experiences. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere. They won't expect us to go. These people are professionals, which means they think in terms of logical, tactical decisions. We're going to do something completely illogical." Maya led Emma to the building's basement, where she'd identified an old utility tunnel that connected to the city's storm drainage system. It wasn't a comfortable route of escape, but it was invisible to the kind of surveillance equipment that professional operators would be using to monitor the building. "Maya," Emma said as they prepared to enter the tunnel, "yesterday you saved my life by risking your own. Today you're doing it again. Why?" Maya paused in her preparations, considering the question that cut to the heart of everything she'd been. trained to believe about responsibility and sacrifice. Because 3 years ago, I made a choice to become invisible, to live a quiet life where I didn't have to use the skills my father taught me. But yesterday, I remembered something he told. "Me, you can't choose not to be involved. You can only choose which side you're on." The sound of vehicles pulling up outside the safe house interrupted their conversation. Maya could hear the coordinated movement of a tactical team taking positions around the building, and she knew they were out of time. "Emma, from this point forward, you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, without question or hesitation. These people are here to kill us both, and our only chance of survival is perfect coordination." As they entered the drainage tunnel, Maya's phone buzzed with a final text from her father. "The hunter becomes the hunted. Show them what a real predator looks like." Maya smiled grimly as she led Emma into the darkness beneath Portland. The invisible barista was about to become very visible indeed. The storm drainage system beneath Portland was a labyrinth that most of the city's residents never thought about. A hidden network of concrete tunnels and maintenance passages that carried rainwater from the streets to the Willamette River. Maya had spent hours studying the municipal engineering maps during her years of preparation, understanding that in a city where visibility could be deadly, sometimes survival meant going underground. She led Emma through the tunnels with the confidence of someone who had memorized every junction, every maintenance access point, every possible route to safety or strategic advantage. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, but Maya wasn't concerned about noise discipline. The acoustics of the tunnel system would make it impossible for anyone following them to determine their exact location based on sound. "Alone, where are we going?" Emma whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the enclosed space. "Somewhere we can control the terms of engagement," Maya replied, checking her phone for updates from her father. "The people hunting us are professionals, but they're not familiar with this terrain. That gives us an advantage." They reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged, and Maya paused to orient herself using landmarks she'd memorized years ago. This was the heart of the system, the central hub that connected to maintenance shafts leading back to street level at strategic points throughout downtown. Portland. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Cleanup team found the safe house. Empty. They're spreading out to search the surrounding area. You have maybe 20 minutes before they think to check the drainage system." Maya typed back quickly. "Understood. Implementing contingency plan 7. Emma read the message over Maya's shoulder. "What's contingency plan 7? "Something my father taught me about turning disadvantages into advantages. Right now we're trapped underground by people who have superior numbers and equipment. But we're also invisible to their surveillance systems, and they're operating in an environment where we have better intelligence than they do." Maya led Emma to a specific maintenance shaft that she'd identified during her planning. It led to a building that had been abandoned for over a year, a former office complex that was scheduled for demolition but had been delayed by city bureaucracy. More importantly, it was a building that Maya had prepared for exactly this kind of situation. They climbed the maintenance ladder in darkness, Maya counting rungs to make sure they stopped at the right level. The shaft opened into the basement of the abandoned building, and Maya used a small flashlight to navigate to the cache of supplies she'd hidden there 3 years ago. "You've been planning for this," Emma said, watching Maya retrieve weapons, ammunition, and communication equipment from a concealed compartment. "My father taught me that hope was a luxury that could get you killed, but preparation was an investment that could save your life. I've been preparing for the possibility that my invisible life might end violently since the day I started working at the Grind and Bean." Maya's phone rang, and she answered it immediately when she saw her father's number. "Maya, the cleanup team has split into 3 groups. 2 teams are searching the surface, but 1 team just entered the drainage system. They'll reach your position in approximately 15 minutes. "Perfect," Maya said, and Emma could hear the smile in her voice. Dad, remember the urban warfare scenarios you used to run with me? The ones where we practiced turning numerical disadvantage into tactical advantage. Maya, you're not seriously considering. I'm considering finishing what these people started. They made this personal when they decided to hunt me down for doing the right thing. It's time to show them what happens when they threaten people I care about. Maya began setting up the abandoned office building like a maze designed to channel the attacking team into positions where their numerical advantage would become a liability. She used furniture to create choke points, positioned mirrors to create false sight lines, and set up acoustic distractions that would mask her actual position. Emma, I need you to go to the roof and call your father. Tell him to have emergency services standing by, but not to send anyone into this building until I give the all clear. I'm not leaving you alone to face these people. Maya turned to look at Emma directly, her expression carrying the weight of 3 years of hidden training and a lifetime of understanding that some battles could only be fought by one person. Emma, yesterday I saved your life by taking a shot I wasn't sure I could make. Today, I'm asking you to save both our lives by trusting me to do what I was trained to do. The sound of movement in the drainage system below confirmed that their pursuers had found the right tunnel. Maya checked her equipment one final time and moved to the position she'd chosen for the first engagement. Her phone buzzed with a final message from her father. Remember, you're not just fighting for survival. You're fighting for the right to choose who you want to be. Maya smiled as she heard the sound of the cleanup team entering the building below. The invisible barista was about to remind some very dangerous people that being overlooked was sometimes the most dangerous mistake they could make. The final confrontation was about to begin. And Maya Chen was ready to show the world exactly who she really was. The abandoned office building had become Maya's battlefield. Every floor a carefully orchestrated trap designed to turn the hunters into the hunted. She moved through the space like a ghost, using her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to stay one step ahead of the professional killers who had been sent to eliminate her. The cleanup team was good. She could hear their coordinated movements, their careful room-to-room clearing procedures, their whispered communications as they advanced through the building. But they were operating in her territory now. Maya had positioned herself on the 3rd floor, in what had once been a conference room overlooking the main stairwell. She'd created firing positions using overturned tables and filing cabinets, giving herself multiple angles of attack while maintaining clear escape routes. The team below was moving methodically, professionally, but they were making one crucial mistake. They were treating this like a standard building clearance operation, not understanding that their target had turned the entire structure into a weapon. The first operative appeared at the stairwell landing, moving with the careful precision of someone who had been trained for exactly this kind of urban warfare. Maya could see the tactical gear, the body armor, the military-grade weapons that marked him as a professional soldier rather than a common criminal. These weren't street thugs or even organized crime enforcers. These were the kind of operators that governments hired for missions that couldn't officially exist. Maya's first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall. She deliberately aimed for a non-fatal wound, understanding that a wounded enemy was more valuable than a dead one. He would require medical attention and tactical resources, slowing down the rest of the team and creating confusion in their ranks. The return fire was immediate and overwhelming, automatic weapons raking the conference room and turning the drywall into clouds of dust and debris. Maya was already moving, using the building's internal structure to mask her position as she relocated to a different firing position. Her father had taught her that in urban combat, mobility was life. The moment you stayed in one place too long was the moment you died. She reached the eastern corner of the building, where she'd previously identified a weakness in the floor that would allow her to drop down to the 2nd level without using the stairs. The cleanup team was still focused on the conference room, not realizing that their target had already moved to a completely different position. Maya used their confusion to her advantage, appearing behind them long enough to take another precise shot that disabled a second operative. The team leader's voice echoed through the building, sharp with frustration and growing concern. Target is mobile and well-positioned. She knows this building better than we do. Request immediate backup and air support. Maya smiled grimly as she heard the transmission. Air support meant helicopters, which meant they were taking her seriously enough to escalate their response. But it also meant they were running out of options for a quiet elimination. The more resources they committed to this operation, the more visible it became. And visibility was the enemy of covert operations. Her phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Police and FBI units are staging 2 blocks away. Dad says to hold on for 10 more minutes. 10 minutes was a lifetime in urban combat, but Maya had been trained for exactly this kind of endurance test. She began implementing what her father called the harassment protocol, a series of hit-and-run attacks designed to wear down the enemy's psychological resilience while conserving her own ammunition and energy. She moved to the building's central elevator shaft, using the emergency access ladder to position herself between floors. From this vantage point, she could observe the cleanup team's movements while remaining invisible to their sweep patterns. The remaining operatives were becoming more cautious, more paranoid, jumping at shadows and firing at movements that turned out to be pieces of debris or reflected light. Maya's third shot came from an angle they hadn't expected, through a ventilation grate that she'd previously identified as a firing position. The bullet found its mark in the thigh of the team's communications specialist, taking him out of the fight and further degrading their coordination capabilities. The sound of sirens in the distance suggested that Emma's message had been accurate. Law enforcement was closing in on the building. Maya could hear the cleanup team's leader making increasingly urgent radio calls, trying to coordinate an extraction before the authorities arrived. The professional killers who had been sent to eliminate a simple barista were discovering that they had walked into a trap laid by someone who understood urban warfare better than they did. "This is impossible," one of the operatives whispered into his radio. "She's moving like she knows every inch of this building, like she's been planning this for years." Maya had been planning this for years. Every abandoned building in downtown Portland, every potential safe house, every possible escape route, she'd studied them all, understanding that her father's enemies might someday become her enemies, and that survival would depend on preparation rather than luck. The sound of helicopters filled the air, but they weren't the military aircraft the cleanup team had been expecting. These were police helicopters, news crews, and emergency medical units responding to reports of gunfire in the downtown area. The covert operation had become a very public incident, and Maya knew that the cleanup team's mission parameters had just changed dramatically. Her phone rang, and she answered it without taking her eyes off the stairwell below. "Maya, this is your father. The cavalry is here. FBI tactical teams are moving into position around the building. You need to signal your location so they can distinguish you from the hostiles." Maya looked out the window and saw the organized chaos of a major law enforcement response. Police cars, FBI vans, SWAT vehicles, and ambulances were converging on the building from all directions. Her invisible life was about to become very visible indeed, but for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid of being seen. The FBI tactical team that stormed the abandoned office building found a scene that would later be described in official reports as unprecedented in its tactical sophistication. 3 professional operatives were down but alive, their wounds precise enough to disable without causing permanent damage. The building itself had been transformed into an elaborate maze of defensive positions, improvised weapons, and psychological warfare tactics that suggested months of preparation by someone with advanced military training. Maya Chen stood in the center of the main lobby, her hands visible and her weapons laid out on the floor in front of her. when Special Agent Patricia Nakamura led the federal response team into the building. Maya had been expecting this moment for 3 years, and she faced it with the calm certainty of someone who had finally stopped running from who she really was. "Miss Chen," Agent Nakamura said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades investigating cases that existed at the intersection of national security and organized crime. "I have to say, when Mayor Sterling called me about a barista who had prevented an assassination attempt, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting to find." "Most people don't expect much from baristas," Maya replied, and for the first time in years, there was no attempt to hide the steel in her voice. "That's usually the point." The debriefing took place in a conference room at the FBI's Portland field office, with Maya sitting across from a panel of federal agents, military intelligence officers, and officials whose names she recognized from national news reports. Emma Sterling sat beside her, having insisted on being present despite her father's protests, and Thomas Sterling was coordinating with what seemed like half the federal government. "Let's start with the basics," Agent Nakamura said, opening a file that Maya could see contained photographs, surveillance reports, and documents that spanned back several years. Maya Chen, 25 years old, graduated from Roosevelt High School with honors, no criminal record, employed at the Grind and Bean coffee shop for 3 years. Daughter of Marcus Chen, former Army Ranger and current private security consultant. "Is that accurate so far?" "As far as it goes," Maya said. "What it doesn't say is that you've been living under what amounts to a false identity since you were 18 years old," Agent Nakamura continued. "The real Maya Chen died in a car accident 7 years ago. The woman sitting in this room has been using her identity ever since." The revelation sent a shock through the room, but Maya had been expecting this moment. Her father had warned her that eventually, someone with the right resources and motivation would dig deep enough to uncover the truth. "My real name is Sarah Marcus," Maya said, and saying it out loud for the first time in years felt like shedding a skin she'd outgrown. "I am Marcus Chen's daughter, but Maya Chen was my best friend. She died in the accident that was meant to kill me." Agent Nakamura leaned forward, her expression intense with the focus of someone who had spent years pursuing answers to questions that kept her awake at night. "Who wanted to kill you, Sarah? And why?" Sarah looked around the room, meeting the eyes of everyone present before settling on Emma Sterling. "Because my father wasn't just a military sniper and security consultant. He was part of a classified program that handled eliminations that the government couldn't officially authorize. When he retired, he took with him information that certain people wanted to remain buried." "What kind of information?" "Names, dates, financial records, communication logs, everything. Needed to expose a network of corruption that reached from local politics all the way to federal agencies. My father had been collecting evidence for years, insurance against the day when his former employers decided he knew too much." Thomas Sterling spoke for the first time since the debriefing had begun. "Are you saying that the attempt on Emma's life was connected to your father's work?" "I'm saying that 7 years ago, someone tried to kill me to prevent my father from releasing that information. When that failed, they settled for making us disappear. We've been hiding ever since, waiting for them to try again." Emma reached over and took Sarah's hand, her eyes bright with understanding. "You didn't just save my life yesterday. You used me as bait to draw them out into the open." Sarah squeezed Emma's hand, feeling the weight of secrets finally lifted from her shoulders. "I've spent 3 years watching and waiting, learning their patterns, identifying their assets. I knew they were planning something big, but I didn't know it would involve you until yesterday morning." Agent Nakamura was typing rapidly on her tablet, cross-referencing information and making connections that had eluded federal investigators for years. "Sarah, the network your father identified, do you have access to his evidence?" "I have everything," Sarah said. Names, financial records, communication intercepts, operational plans. Enough to bring down a conspiracy that's been operating for over a decade. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Sarah Marcus, the invisible barista who had spent 3 years hiding behind someone else's identity, had just offered to hand the federal government the key to one of the most significant corruption cases in recent history. "There's just one condition," Sarah added, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned to negotiate from a position of strength. "I want full immunity for my father, witness protection for both of us, and a guarantee that the people responsible for this conspiracy will face justice." Agent Nakamura smiled for the first time since the debriefing had begun. "Miss Marcus, I think we can work something out." As the federal agents began making phone calls and coordinating what would become one of the largest corruption investigations in Pacific Northwest history, Sarah looked out the window at the city of Portland spread out below. Her invisible life was over, but for the first time since she was 18 years old, she was looking forward to discovering who she might become when she was finally free to be herself. The war room in the FBI's Portland field office had been transformed into the nerve center of what Agent Nakamura was calling Operation Clean Sweep. Wall-mounted monitors displayed organizational charts, financial flow diagrams, and surveillance photos that revealed the scope of the corruption network Sarah's father had been tracking for over a decade. The evidence Sarah had provided was more comprehensive than anything federal investigators had dreamed possible, a complete roadmap to a conspiracy that reached into every level of government in the Pacific Northwest. The shell company that Emma identified near the grind and bean was just the tip of the iceberg. Agent Nakamura explained to the assembled task force of FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and military intelligence officers. Marcus Chen's files show a network of at least 47 corporations, all linked through a web of offshore accounts and dummy executives, all ultimately controlled by a single organization. Sarah sat at the conference table, no longer hiding behind the identity of Maya Chen, finally able to use her real skills without pretending to be someone else. The tactical analysis she'd been conducting from behind a coffee counter had been accurate. The assassination attempt on Emma Sterling had been part of a much larger operation designed to eliminate or intimidate anyone who posed a threat to the network's interests. "The pattern is clear once you know what to look for," Sarah said, pointing to a timeline that showed the incidents her father had identified. "They've been systematically targeting public officials who were investigating specific areas, environmental regulations, defense contracting, municipal bond issues, and urban development projects. Anyone who got too close to discovering the financial connections was either compromised, intimidated, or eliminated." Thomas Sterling, who had been coordinating with federal agencies since the previous day, looked pale as he reviewed the evidence. "Sarah, according to these documents, the network knew about Emma's movements because they had compromised her security detail. They weren't just planning to kill her, they were planning to use her death to justify a complete restructuring of the mayor's security apparatus, which would have given them control over who had access to the mayor and what information reached his office," Sarah confirmed. Emma's assassination would have been the trigger for installing their own people in positions where they could control the flow of intelligence and decision-making. Emma, who had insisted on being present despite the classified nature of the information being discussed, spoke up from her position near the window. "You're saying they wanted to kill me to get to my father?" "I'm saying they wanted to kill you to control your father," Sarah replied. "A grieving parent is vulnerable to manipulation, especially when the people offering comfort and support are the same people who orchestrated the tragedy." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Marcus Chen's file showed financial connections that linked the assassination network to defense contractors, real estate developers, and political organizations across 3 states. The attempted murder of Emma Sterling had been just one operation. in a campaign that had been running for years, designed to reshape the political landscape of the entire region. The good news, Agent Nakamura said, is that Sarah's intervention yesterday forced them to accelerate their timeline and expose assets they had planned to keep hidden for years longer. The cleanup team that attacked the abandoned building included operatives whose identities we've been trying to establish for months. Now we have them in custody, and they're providing information that's filling in gaps we didn't even know existed. Sarah pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through encrypted files that contained years of intelligence gathering. My father didn't just collect evidence of their financial operations. He identified their recruitment patterns, their operational procedures, and their decision-making hierarchy. The network operates like a hybrid between a military organization and a criminal enterprise, with cells that are isolated from each other but coordinated through a central command structure. Do we know who's running the central command? Thomas Sterling asked. Sarah's expression darkened as she accessed a file that she'd hoped never to open. According to my father's intelligence, the network is controlled by a consortium of 3 individuals. One is a former CIA operative who went private after being forced out for unauthorized operations. One is a defense contractor who's been using his government connections to eliminate business competition. And the third. She paused, meeting Agent Nakamura's eyes directly. The third is a federal judge who's been using his position to protect the network's interests and eliminate threats through the legal system. The room erupted in urgent conversations as federal agents began making phone calls and coordinating what would clearly become one of the most significant corruption investigations in decades. Sarah watched the organized chaos with the satisfaction of someone who had finally been able to complete a mission that had been 7 years in the making. Emma approached her as the meeting began to break up into smaller working groups. Sarah, what happens now? Do you go back to being invisible? Sarah considered the question, looking out at the city of Portland where she'd spent 3 years hiding in plain sight. I don't think I can go back to being invisible. But I'm not sure I know how to be visible either. Maybe you don't have to choose, Emma said. Maybe you can be exactly who you are, someone who makes incredible coffee and also happens to be capable of stopping assassination attempts. Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I suppose there are worse things to be known. FOA. Agent Nakamura approached them, holding a secure phone and wearing the expression of someone who had just received information that changed everything. Sarah, I just got off the phone with the director. The evidence you've provided has triggered a coordinated federal response involving 5 different agencies. We're executing simultaneous raids on 47 locations across 3 states. This is the biggest corruption takedown in FBI history. What about my father? Sarah asked. What about our safety? Full immunity for both of you, witness protection. If you want it, and a guarantee that the people responsible for this conspiracy will face federal charges. Agent Nakamura's expression softened slightly. Sarah, you and your father have just helped us dismantle a network that was responsible for at least 12 deaths and millions of dollars in public corruption. The government owes you a debt that can never fully be repaid. As federal agents continued their preparations for what would be a coordinated takedown operation, Sarah found herself standing at the window, looking out at the city she'd called home for 3 years. The grind and bean was visible in the distance, a small coffee shop that had been the center of her invisible world. Until yesterday, her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Heard the news. Proud of you. Ready to stop running? Sarah typed back, more than ready. Time to find out who we really are when we're not hiding. The corruption network that had controlled Sarah's life for 7 years was about to be destroyed. But she realized that the most important victory wasn't the takedown of a criminal conspiracy. It was the discovery that she no longer needed to be invisible to be safe. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in a world that was finally ready to see her for who she really was. The barista who had been dismissed and overlooked had become the key to one of the most significant federal investigations in recent history. And tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to return to making coffee or to embrace a completely different kind of life altogether. 6 months after the corruption network was dismantled, Sarah Marcus stood behind the counter of a coffee shop that looked remarkably similar to the Grind and Bean, but felt completely different. The new establishment, which she'd named Second Shot, was located in downtown Seattle, far enough from Portland to represent a fresh start, but close enough to feel like home. The familiar rhythm of grinding beans and pulling espresso shots had helped her transition from her old, invisible life to something that was still being defined. The federal raids had been even more successful than Agent Nakamura had predicted. 47 arrests across 3 states, including the federal judge, the CIA operative, and the defense contractor who had been running the conspiracy. The trials were still ongoing, but the prosecution had enough evidence to ensure that the key players would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Sarah's testimony had been crucial, but she'd been able to provide it under protective conditions that allowed her to maintain some privacy. Emma Sterling had become a regular customer at Second Shot, despite living 2 hours away in Portland. She claimed it was because Sarah made the best lavender lattes in the Pacific Northwest, but Sarah suspected it had more to do with the friendship that had developed between 2 women who had shared an experience that had changed both of their lives forever. "You know," Emma said, settling into her usual chair by the window, "my father keeps asking if you'd be interested in a job with the city's security division. Apparently, your tactical analysis skills are legendary among the federal agencies." "Now," Sarah smiled as she prepared Emma's usual order, "I think I've had enough of government work for a while. There's something to be said for a job where the biggest crisis is running out of oat milk." The front door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Agent Nakamura entering the cafe. The federal investigator had become something of a regular customer as well, though Sarah suspected her visits were as much about maintaining contact with a valuable asset as they were about the quality of the coffee. "Agent Nakamura," Sarah said, already beginning to prepare the black coffee with 1 sugar that had become the agent's standard order. "How's the prosecution going?" "Better than we had any right to expect," Nakamura replied, taking a seat at the counter. "The defense contractor's plea agreement led us to 3 more networks operating in other regions. Your father's intelligence has been the gift that keeps on giving." Marcus Chen had chosen to remain in witness protection, using his new identity to pursue the academic career he'd always wanted but never had time for. He was teaching criminal justice at a small college in Montana, finally able to use his expertise to train the next generation of law enforcement professionals without looking over his shoulder. Sarah spoke to him every week, and for the first time in years, their conversations weren't dominated by operational security concerns. "There is one thing I wanted to discuss with you," Agent Nakamura continued, her tone becoming more serious. "We've been approached by several other federal agencies about the possibility of consulting work. Nothing that would put you back in the field, but analytical work, pattern recognition, the kind of intelligence assessment that you've proven exceptionally good at." Sarah considered the offer while she worked on perfecting a new drink recipe she'd been developing. The idea of using her skills in an official capacity was appealing, but she'd grown to appreciate the simplicity of her current life. The coffee shop gave her a sense of purpose without the constant stress of life or death situations. "I'm flattered," Sarah said finally, "but I think I'm exactly where I need to be right now." Emma looked up from her laptop where she'd been working on her graduate school applications. "Sarah, you could do both, couldn't you? Keep the coffee shop but also do consulting work? The best of both worlds?" It was an intriguing possibility. Sarah had discovered that she enjoyed the tactical challenges of federal investigation work, But she'd also found peace in the rhythm of daily coffee shop operations. Perhaps there was a way to combine both aspects of her identity without sacrificing either. What would that look like? Sarah asked Agent Nakamura. Part-time consulting, work-from-home arrangements, cases that match your particular expertise. Think of it as being on call for situations that require your specific combination of skills. Nakamura paused to take a sip of her coffee. Plus, it would allow you to maintain this cover identity while still contributing to national security. Best of both worlds, as Emma said. Sarah looked around her coffee shop, taking in the comfortable atmosphere she'd created, the regular customers, who had become part of her daily routine. The sense of community that had developed around Second Shot. This wasn't just a business, it was the foundation of the visible life she'd been building since deciding to stop hiding. I'll consider it, Sarah said, and meant it. But any consulting work would have to work around my coffee shop schedule. Some things are more important than saving the world. As the afternoon wore on and the usual collection of regulars filled the cafe, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that October morning when she'd thrown a coffee mug at an assassin's rifle. She was no longer invisible, but she wasn't entirely visible either. Instead, she'd found a balance that allowed her to be both the skilled tactical analyst and the neighborhood barista, both the woman who could stop professional killers and the person who remembered how everyone liked their coffee. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Saw the news about the final conviction. Proud of you. Any regrets about the path not taken? Sarah typed back while simultaneously pulling shots for 2 cappuccinos. No regrets. Found something better than either path alone. The door chimed again as new customers entered, and Sarah looked up with the genuine smile of someone who had finally found her place in the world. 1 year after the assassination attempt that had changed everything, Sarah Marcus found herself standing in the exact spot where it had all begun. The Grind and Bean had been renovated and reopened under new management, but the corner of 3rd and Morrison still held the echoes of that October afternoon when an invisible barista had chosen to become visible. She wasn't alone. Emma Sterling stood beside her, along with Agent Nakamura, Thomas Sterling, and Mayor Richard Sterling, who had specifically requested this meeting location. The mayor looked older but more at peace than he had during those terrifying days when his daughter's life had hung in the balance. It seems appropriate to be here, Mayor Sterling said, looking through the windows at the cafe where his daughter's life had been saved. This is where everything started, and in many ways, where everything ended. The final trial had concluded just 2 weeks earlier. The federal judge who had been at the center of the corruption network had been sentenced to life in federal prison, joining the CIA operative and the defense contractor who had already received similar sentences. The network that had terrorized public officials across the Pacific Northwest had been completely dismantled, its assets seized, and its members either imprisoned or in hiding. Sarah, Agent Nakamura said, I have something for you. She handed over an official-looking certificate that Sarah recognized as a civilian commendation from the FBI director for exceptional service in the investigation and prosecution of a criminal conspiracy that threatened the democratic institutions of 3 states. Sarah accepted the commendation with the awkward grace of someone who still wasn't entirely comfortable with public recognition. Over the past year, she'd found a balance between her consulting work with federal agencies and her daily operations at Second Shot, but she remained fundamentally someone who preferred to work behind the scenes. There's something else, Emma sighed, pulling out an envelope that bore the seal of Portland State University. I've been accepted to their graduate program in public administration. I'm going to study how to make government more transparent and accountable. Someone recently taught me that the best way to prevent corruption is to make sure that everyone in power knows they're being watched. Sarah smiled at the implication. Emma's decision to pursue a career in government reform was directly inspired by their shared experience and Sarah couldn't think of anyone better suited to the work of keeping public officials honest. Thomas Sterling stepped forward, his expression more serious than the others. "Sarah, there's one more thing we need to discuss. The intelligence you provided led to the discovery of similar networks operating in other regions. The federal government is establishing a new task force specifically designed to identify and dismantle these kinds of corruption conspiracies before they can take root." "Let me guess," Sarah said. "They want me to run it." "They want you to consider running it," Thomas corrected. "Full federal authority, unlimited resources, and the kind of mandate that would allow you to prevent what happened here from happening anywhere else." It was the kind of offer that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier, when Sarah had been hiding behind the identity of Maya Chen and trying to remain invisible. Now, she was being offered the chance to lead a federal task force with the power to investigate corruption at the highest levels of government. Sarah looked around at the people who had become her unlikely family over the past year. Emma, who had grown from a college student into a committed public servant. Agent Nakamura, who had become both a professional colleague and a personal friend. The Sterling family, who had embraced her as the person who had saved not just Emma's life, but their entire way of thinking about public service and personal responsibility. "I appreciate the offer," Sarah said finally, "but I think I'm exactly where I need to be. The coffee shop keeps me grounded, the consulting work keeps me engaged, and I've learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who choose to remain partially invisible." Mayor Sterling nodded with understanding. "Sarah, what you've taught all of us is that heroism isn't about seeking recognition or power. It's about doing the right thing when no one is watching and being ready to act when the moment demands it." As they prepared to leave the corner where everything had changed, Sarah felt the weight of decisions made and paths chosen. She had started as an invisible barista who wanted nothing more than to remain hidden, and she had become someone who chose when to be seen and when to remain in the shadows. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Coffee shop busy today?" Sarah typed back, "Always. But I wouldn't have it any other way." Emma linked arms with Sarah as they walked away from the grind and bean. "So what's next for the famous barista who saved the mayor's daughter?" "Tomorrow morning, I have a new espresso blend to test, a federal case to review, and a regular customer who's been trying to get me to try speed dating," Sarah replied. "In other words, the usual chaos." "Sounds perfect," Emma said, and Sarah realized that it really was. She had found something better than either invisibility or complete visibility. She had found the freedom to choose who she wanted to be in each moment, whether that was a neighborhood barista who remembered everyone's order or a federal consultant who could dismantle criminal conspiracies. The barista they had dismissed had become someone who would never be overlooked again. But more importantly, she had become someone who no longer needed to hide from the world or from herself. As they walked through the streets of Portland toward Second Shot, where her afternoon customers would be waiting for their daily dose of perfectly crafted coffee and casual conversation, Sarah Marcus smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had finally found her place in a world that was complex enough to need both excellent coffee and the occasional thwarted assassination attempt. The story had come full circle, but the real adventure was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.